was a man with a huge nose for news, a huge thirst for news. You know, whatever methods he achieved, he simply wanted to be there first. Shafting the opposition is a phrase he would use with pride. You know, this is what mattered to him. But it was to get the story out.
He had that central characteristic. He was a stubborn, obstinate, determined guy. And I think if you're going to be a success in our business, you have to have that, and he certainly did. I mean, I think of those qualities being absolutely essential if you're going to get on in Africa, because things can be difficult here. There are always obstructions, and you can get petty officials putting things in your way. Mohamed was very good at overcoming those obstacles.
If it meant getting the story, Dad had no objection to slipping into fancy dress. He borrowed this topper and tails from a theatre company so that he could gatecrash the coronation of Jean Bidel Bokassa, cannibal king of the Central African Republic. The French media were enraged. They had negotiated exclusive rights until Dad coolly joined the party and began to shoot. The ex-army sergeant blew a quarter of his country's tiny budget on a ceremony aping the coronation of Napoleon. How the Parisians tittered at this absurd spectacle. Dad loved it, of course. He got his story, and he shafted the opposition. Sure. Look at this place. This is an entire lifetime of accumulated paperwork, invoices, newspapers, magazines, letters. He never threw anything away, especially stuff that had something about him in it. And you've got, look at this, you've got press cards here going back 40 years of every major event in Africa that he covered. You've got documentary scripts about him, the ones that he wrote. You've even got a film script here that somebody was trying to do on him. It didn't really get very far, but it's here. And even here, you got one of his famous black books of contacts. People from all over Africa, in fact, all over the world, that he knew and could keep him ahead of the pack when it came to stories. They were incredible stuff. Dad's patch was East Africa. Someone said he patrolled its borders like a jealous predator, crushing all opposition. He knew knowledge was power, and within the covers of his black books, he hoarded every name and every telephone number like a miser. He never drank alcohol, my pa. This set him apart, but it often meant he was a jump ahead. Dad had been coming to Ethiopia since the days of the Lion of Judah, Emperor Haile Selassie. He shot a documentary about the emperor called To Build a Nation. It was to be the Lion of Judah's 80th birthday present. Dad took the last pictures of him, a lonely, dignified and gaunt figure in the palace gardens in Addis Ababa. This was just before he was suffocated in his bed on the orders of the incoming Marxist government of Haile Mariam Mengistu. A change of regime meant that Dad had to make a few adjustments to his contacts book, which he duly did. Ethiopia was now a communist state and armed to the teeth. Dad continued to chronicle events here, the so-called Red Terror, the famine, the rants from the podium, the military parades. And he was first there in 1991, when rebels from the north simply walked into the capital. It was a ragtag army Dad filmed, kids really, but they had routed the biggest and best armed army in Africa. On their way south, they had seized squadrons of Soviet-built tanks as the regime soldiers threw away their uniforms and melted into the crowd. Colin, the day Addis fell, you were trying to get in from Nairobi. It was chaos on the ground here. You got hold of my dad. What happened that day?
It was just one of the most dramatic things that I've ever done as a journalist, deciding to leave Nairobi, chartering a small plane, come to Addis knowing that the airport wasn't open because they'd be put buses across the runway, but still hoping that somehow we could persuade the control tower to let us land. It had just been chaotic because the government had fallen, but there was no new authority yet. And it was your dad who managed to make things happen. And he says that what he did was he persuaded the people at the airport that he would feed them. They were hungry, they hadn't had anything to eat for days, and he brought out a vat of curry from the Hilton Hotel. If that's true, well, good on him, because what happened was that they allowed us to land, they moved some of the buses, and we came hammering in to the airport. I have to say that the window of opportunity closed as soon as we'd come in, because after that, the airport was closed again, the buses were put across the runway. The next plane that came in actually crash landed on the long grass, and that was the next group of journalists, and they didn't get in.
And he used that plane to then take out his film and his footage and left everybody else's behind.
That's what happened. Tad Watts, the pilot from Nairobi, was asked by CNN and by some other photographers if he would take their stuff back to Nairobi. Didn't seem an unreasonable request. It was to your dad, because he knew that if he could get his pictures out only, he would have a huge exclusive. And that's what he got. He got the big exclusive on the television pictures, but he also got his still pictures out as well. And he was so happy. Of course, the other guys, understandably distraught.
More journalists eventually did arrive, and there was lots to film as the regime fell apart and Mengistu fled into the arms of his friend Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe. There was dramatic footage as the mob vented its fury on the Soviet Union's gift to its Ethiopian comrades. The problem, as always, was getting this mouth-watering footage back to the world's newsrooms.
I can certainly think of occasions when Mohamed really put one over on the opposition, I mean, almost to the point of being cruel. And the best example, I think, was here in Addis. We were all trying to send our television packages out, and the only way to do this was from Ethiopian TV. They had the satellite dish, which could be used to get things from here to European broadcasters elsewhere. So there was a window every night, and Mohamed somehow seemed to have control of that window. And every day it was the BBC's package that went first, because Mohamed was in charge of that, and then there would be a glitch. Something would go wrong. The guys from German television didn't quite make it. The Swedes didn't get out that night. And when it happened 2 or 3 days in a row, with Mohamed standing by the shoulder of the person who was controlling the satellite, when it happened several times, it just became more than a coincidence. And the view in the hotel was that Mohamed was doing this, that he was having a word in the ear of the censor, and that's why the French weren't getting out, the Italians weren't getting out. And by the end of 4 or 5 days or so, they were livid. They were hardly speaking to him, and I think he was doing it too.